I trust you can take out. And I know it's a lot of scripture today. We're taking another slice of Joseph's life. And since we're on this chapter here about things becoming brand new for Joseph, I think you're going to find this encouraging, inspiring, hopeful, and maybe even applicable to your own situation in your own life. First, I want us to look at this little diagram here. The past and the future, or now. Joseph could have dwelt on his past, and we've talked about this before. Remember that before we read these words, there are several negative things that happened in Joseph's life that he could have dwelt on, he could have focused on. For one, he was thrown into a pit and left there to die by his brothers. Hated by his brothers, crying out all night long for someone to rescue him and to love him. And thankfully, one of his brothers took mercy on him and actually pulled him out of the pit. And after he was pulled out of the pit, he was sold as a slave. And this is where he lived, in Potiphar's house, and he did very well as a slave. He took this opportunity of lemons and turned it into lemonade. He turned a negative thing into a positive thing, and he did it by his attitude. He did it by his behavior. He just was determined to do the right thing, to hang in there, to trust God, to remember the dreams that God had given him, and to rest his hope on things would get better if he would just hang in there. And as a slave, you know, he became the leader of the rest of the slaves. And he did very well as a slave. In fact, he actually withstood temptation with the wife of Potiphar. And she was a hot babe, dressed in very nice clothes. She wore Chantel perfume. What was it? Chanel. That's it. She wore Chantel perfume.
I think she wore Chanel instead. It would have worked.
Yeah, it wouldn't have. And he even withstood that temptation. Of course, he was falsely accused by this wife because she jerked his cloak off of him when he tried to run away from her. And then she showed it to her husband and said, "See that Hebrew slave of yours, Joseph? He tried to seduce me." And the husband, who was the chief executioner, did not immediately kill Joseph. Instead, he sent Joseph to prison, where Joseph was for 2 years. So he's gone from the pit to being a slave, where he did well, to now being in prison. And after being 2 years in prison, he wondered, maybe, is God going to be with me, or where is God in all of this? And he continued to do the right thing. He continued to trust God. And then one day, the Pharaoh heard that Joseph was very good at interpreting dreams. So the Pharaoh called Joseph out of prison and said, "Hey, young man, I hear you know how to interpret dreams. I had this dream and I want you to interpret it for me." And so Joseph said, "I can't do it, but God can. Do you want me to be the tool that God speaks through to interpret your dream?" And Pharaoh said yes. And by the time Joseph was done interpreting that dream, Pharaoh said, "I've never met anybody like you. The Spirit of God is in you. I've never heard anybody talk like you talk. You have discernment and wisdom." And Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, recognized in Joseph the Spirit of God, discernment, and wisdom, and that impressed Pharaoh. And then Joseph gave his 2 cents on what Pharaoh should do because of the dream that Pharaoh had. Because Joseph said, "Hey Pharaoh, here's what's going to happen. 7 years of plenty, a lot of crops, good resources, abundance. But as soon as that 7 years is over, the economy is going to tank. You're going to run out of food, famine everywhere." And while he's describing this, Joseph says, "So Pharaoh, you're going to need to put somebody in charge who has leadership ability. Somebody who can govern. Somebody who has discernment to be able to run the country in the time of abundance and then the time of famine." And Joseph doesn't volunteer himself, but it's covert, it's inherent in what he's saying to Pharaoh. By the way, you need somebody good who can run the country, who has wisdom and discernment and ability to govern and leadership ability. And then Pharaoh says, well, Joseph, maybe you're the one we need. I want you. I want you to be that man. So now things are looking up for Joseph. And that's where we come to today. It's a whole new world. Thank God Joseph is thinking that I held on and I didn't give up. Thank God I persevered, because now you talk about the worm turning. You talk about circumstances taking on a whole new brighter tone just because he hung in there. You talk about a new season full of life and abundance and happiness and joy and fulfillment and authority and promotion. That time has come. Joseph could have lived right here. And all the negativity that surrounded this. I hate this prison food. Who's the cook? I don't like being a slave. I remember when I used to be able to go out and play basketball and I was my own boss. Now I'm cooped up in this house with other slaves. There are so many ways he could have dwelt on the negative. But he didn't. Instead, he just kept doing the right thing, persevered. It's like this in marriage. It ebbs and it flows, doesn't it? Good seasons and then maybe not so great seasons. Plateaus and mountains. And if we quit and we live right here, we may quit right before all the good times start to happen. And you don't know it, but there's a floodgate of blessing that's about to open up in your life. And because you quit, all the good stuff you didn't get to enjoy, because while you were in the season of negativity, you let that kill the relationship. But if we can endure, persevere, make it through a rocky time, then it might just open up the blessings that were opened up to Joseph, which is what we're going to look at now. That's a long introduction right there. Where's my clicker? Joseph was, it's a whole new world. What do you think of when you hear that phrase, it's a whole new world?
New beginning.
New beginning? I think of Aladdin at Disneyland.
Disney song.
It's a whole new world. Something like that. You know what I mean. Yeah. Joseph was given new authority and new status. Look at what's about to happen after all of this. Look at these opportunities and blessings of what God's going to do for Joseph. Mario, let's see. No, you already read. Cheryl, can you read that?
I'll try.
All right.
So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt.
He went from being a hated brother and a slave and a prisoner to being the prime minister, the governor. And he didn't even have to go to the Republican Party and run for office. He got appointed instead of elected. A brand new status. I mean, we don't fully understand because we don't know the customs of the day. But give me one of the things that jumps out at you as to how Joseph being elevated or promoted.
Signet ring.
A signet ring. You know what that signet ring? It was 1 inch wide, 2 inches long. It was something that only the king could give you. It was exclusive. It was an exclusive honor. It was like our coins, Cody. You know, only the Colonel Wade could give you. That kind of authority when you had a signet ring given to you by the Pharaoh. Something else.
Clothing.
Clothing, fine linen. This was exclusive. See, you couldn't go in the temple in wool. The only time you could go in the temple was when you wore the fine linen that was worthy of the temple. And that's the prestigious clothing that Joseph was given. So he's given this exclusive ring, which only can come by the authority of the king, the Pharaoh. He has the exclusive clothes that are required to be able to go into the worshiper, which speaks of dignity and authority and respect and honor. Give me another one.
You got to ride in the chariot with him.
Got to ride in the chariot. Now here's what's cool. Look at this for a second. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. They tell us there was 2 chariots. Not sure how this worked. And people shouted before him, "Make way." Now the only people, or the only person that people would shout for to say bow the knee or make way, do you know who it was? The Pharaoh. So what Pharaoh was doing in essence is saying, Joseph, the very same respect that people give me, they're going to start giving you. And he's not even the Pharaoh. He's just the governor of Egypt. You're going to be second in command, and people shouted before Joseph came and bowed the knee. That's the expression, bow the knee. Make way. Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Man, you want to talk about going from the pits to prestige, from slavery to authority, from the bottom to the top. And Joseph didn't politic one time and promote himself to do it. It was all what the leadership saw in him as Joseph was just preparing himself for blessing. Here's what I want you to get today from this point. Our job is to prepare for blessing. It's God's job to bless you in His own time, in His own way. Joseph couldn't make this happen. All he could do is create the circumstances for it to happen. And that's a big thing. Because sometimes God can't bless us because we haven't done the groundwork and cultivated the soil to be able to receive the blessing. It's kind of like when you're single forever, like me, 48 years of being single, and you're praying, "Oh God, bring me a wife." And the whole time God is saying, "I will, as soon as you get yourself a little bit ready for it. Because you can't handle it right now. I want to bless you, but you can't handle the blessing right now." Joseph prepared for the blessing just by doing the right thing. Trusting God, being open to God, allowing God to work in his life. It's God's job to bless and to bring the abundance in His time and His way, if we'll hang in there. And now is Joseph's time. God's taken all this and given Joseph a brand new status. And that's pretty cool. Next, Joseph was given new responsibility. Sandra, can you read that one for us?
Yes. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name of
Whatever. Yeah.
Zephaniah Paneah, and gave him
You can skip those two if you want.
Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt.
Hey, this is not a bad deal. Joseph's now given new authority. We saw that in the first passage. And now new responsibility because he is in charge. No one will lift a hand or foot in all of Egypt without your word, he says. But without your word, no one will lift a hand or foot, Joseph, unless you dictate it, unless you order it, unless you command it. That's a powerful responsibility right there. And he then gives Joseph a wife. This name, Asenath or Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. This is a priest's daughter. This is a high honor to be given the daughter of a priest. So this woman that Joseph will now be blessed with, given to him by Pharaoh, is the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So he has this new responsibility of a wife, new responsibility of being in charge. No one does anything without his permission, without his command. And he's 30 years old when all this happens. Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and he traveled throughout the land of Egypt. New responsibility. And I like this because anytime you're given responsibility, you should also get authority that matches it. There's nothing worse than being given responsibility without authority. But Joseph's given both. He's given authority, responsibility, and he has the authority. He's got a signet ring on his finger. He's got the prestigious clothes That is a demarcation of him. He's got the other blessings of riding in the chariot. He's got the command. He's sitting in command. The only way I could say it, Cody, is that this would be like the tag coming over to LRS and saying, Cody, you have done a wonderful job taking care of everything in LRS. Welcome to being the base commander. And Cody shoots right up to being the base commander. He goes from, what are you, Tech? Staff sergeant to full bird colonel in no time. Everything is under his command at the base. Nothing is said or done without Cody's permission. And the reason why is because he hung in there when in the LRS building when things got a little rough and there was drama going on. He hung in there and did the right thing, and he's elevated to this kind of a level. Or it would be like Javier Contreras going from his position to the chief over the aerial port. All of a sudden, now he gets to go out to lunch with the tag when the tag comes and visits the base. He gets coined by the generals. So all of a sudden this new authority brings new responsibility. What will Joseph do with this kind of responsibility? How will he handle it? Will he be faithful? Well, we have good indication that he was faithful on the lower levels, so he probably is going to be faithful when he's given more responsibility, because that's the best indicator. Now let's look at this. And we're getting to my main point today, believe it or not. This sermon does have a main point that I want to get to. Joseph was given new opportunities for leadership. Brand new opportunities. Let's see. Let me get a reader. Who wants to read this side? I haven't had any. Gene, you're a good reader. Will you read that for us?
Sure. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentiful. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up high quantities of grain like sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure.
All right. Here's a leader. Here's a leader who knows what's going to happen. 7 years of abundance, 7 years of famine. So he uses his governing gifting, his skill, and indeed, he takes the abundance and he stores it up like a good leader. Kind of like, sometimes I think we should do with dams and rainwater instead of it just going to the ocean. Let's store it up when we need it. So when we have a drought year, we have more water. Just basic leadership over a country. So this is what he's doing. And Joseph, he's interpreted this dream, so he knows what's going to happen. So he's exercising his leadership. And then let's go to this one. Let's see. Wes, read that top part for us.
Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my troubles and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering."
All right. Before the years of famine came, so we've got the good years, Joseph stores up the grain. I really want you to get this, because this is beautiful to me. 2 sons were born to Joseph by this priest's daughter who was given to him in marriage. And look at the definition of what they named their kid. Now, we always name our kids, or in Bible times, they had reasons why they named their kid the name. There was reasons for it, because that name had a definition. It meant something. Just like Danny, you guys named Gabriel for a reason, right? Give us a Reader's Digest.
It was when God gave us the message that we were going to have a son. He said, he told us to name him Gabriel.
Okay? And if you look in the Old Testament, God changed certain people's names for a purpose. So he changed Peter, Simon Peter, to become the rock. He changed Jacob to Israel. He changed many names for a purpose. Look at the names of these 2 sons born to them and what they mean. The first one was Manasseh. And here's what his name means. It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and my father's household. Now think about this for a second. Over here was trouble. Hatred by his brothers. Rejection. Injustice. God said, Joseph has given me this son, and his name means that God helps me forget all my trouble. God helps me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Who's the father's household? His brothers, who caused him all of his pain. So you know what Joseph is saying? That this positive blessing in my life right now is what I'm going to focus on over all the junk that's happened in my past. And because what God is doing right now in my life to bless me with this son named Manasseh, that's so important, it's so powerful, it's so awesome that it takes away, and I don't have to focus on any of this negativity in my past. Because my life is filled with joy and promise and purpose. And God helps me forget all the troubles in my past. How cool would it be if God could put something in your life right now that would help you never think of the negative junk in your past ever again?
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And if somebody did something against you, you wouldn't focus on it because God has given you such a blessing now that your blessing just consumed you. It was just so exciting. It's like, yeah, that happened to me, but I don't even care about that anymore. Look at what God's doing now. Look at what God's blessed. Yeah, I don't care what that person did to me 10 years ago. I've got a son now. And he's beautiful. And why in the world would I focus on this when God has helped me take my focus off of that and put it on my son, Manasseh? And God helps us do that. He helps us forgive people when we can't forgive ourselves. God helps us overcome. Now it didn't mean, don't think this for a second, don't think Joseph ever forgot what his brothers did to him. We'll find out later in the story. He never forgot. He never forgot, but he chose not to dwell on it. Instead, to dwell on the good, positive blessings in his life right now. So think of this for a minute. Your wife, your husband makes you mad. And when they make you mad, what do we want to do sometimes? We want to go back. We want to go back and remind them of something that made us mad a year ago that's similar to what they made us mad about today. Instead of maybe saying, you know what? But that dinner you made last night was so awesome. Why in the world am I going to go back and focus on that? Or you know what? We had a great weekend last weekend together. Why am I going to go back and focus on this argument when we've got such a good thing going here? And you get to choose your focus. You get to choose if you want to live here or if you want to live here. And every day you wake up, you get to choose that. Do I want to focus on this negative thing that happened in my relationship or this experience or this person? Or do I want to focus on the good, positive blessings and all the good that's happening in my life right now? Manasseh helped him forget all the troubles of his family. And Ephraim, the second son, he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Think of that one for a moment. Here's Joseph, the land of suffering. He knew what it was like to suffer. He knew what it was like to have an injustice done against him. He knew what it was like to be falsely accused. He knew all of that. But in the land of his suffering, God brought about fruit. God took dryness and He made plants come up and life come out of a desert. That's what God did. God took a negative thing and turned it into a positive. Because God makes all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and live according to His purpose. So his second son was a reminder that God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. And God knows how to do that. He knows how to take our problems and make good things come out of those. That's what God can do. So these two sons play a pivotal part in Joseph's life because it's a whole new world. You talk about blessing. He's riding around in a chariot now. He's got a new status. He's got a new responsibility. He's got new authority. He's got a new wife. He's got two sons that remind him of God's goodness in his life. And then let's find out what happens next. Beth?
The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to the Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you."
So it happened just as Joseph said. The years of abundance came to an end, and there's no food. All of the abundance had now dried up. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt, there was food. There was food in the land of Egypt because that was the land that Joseph governed. And that was the land that Joseph had prepared for. That was the land that Joseph became a leader of, and he took the right step of preserving food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. "You got to get us some food. We don't have any food." Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." That's going to open the door to some folks coming to Joseph that Joseph is going to recognize real well. It's called his brothers that threw him in the pit years before. But his brothers don't know that it's Joseph. They have no idea that this is their kid brother that they tried to kill. And how in the world would this hated little pipsqueak brother be riding around in a chariot, leading the country, wearing a signet ring and the best clothes and people bowing down to him? How could that be? That can't be. It's going to be real interesting how Joseph now relates to his brothers when his brothers see him and he sees them. And that's what we have to look forward to in the days ahead. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. Joseph, a great leader, and here's why. Great leadership equals wisdom, responsibility, God's Spirit, and God's authority. That's great leadership, and that's what he had. So with all of this, I want you to take away today whatever you want to take away. But I hope you take away that there's a side over here where the sun shines and happiness is in the soul and it puts a smile on your face and it's a good day and it's new opportunity. If you can just hang in there. If you can just hang in there and persevere, and even though you may be in prison now, you're not going to be in prison forever. And even though you're going through a tough time in your marriage now, it's not going to be that way forever. The sun will shine again. Happiness will come. You will increase your communication. Your love for each other will deepen if you'll just make it through the tough times. And you can and you will if you keep looking up. And we draw on God's strength. Anybody want to say anything? Share anything? Any thoughts?
I'm glad Joseph didn't forget how all of it came to be, that he gave God the glory and he didn't take the glory himself.
Yeah. Great point.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question? Were the Egyptians Christians at that time?
No, they were, in fact, the daughter that was given, the priest's daughter that was given to Joseph, is from a place where they worship the sun. They're sun worshippers. I don't know if they had suntan lotion or not, but they worshiped the sun. Yeah. And so this was not what we think of as a Christian community. No. I mean, they worshiped many gods, and they were not monotheists of worshiping the Creator God.
So did Joseph teach Pharaoh about God?
Yes, I believe Joseph, his influence, he managed up, so to speak. He influenced the one who should have been influencing him. Yeah, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes children find the Lord before their parents, and it's the children that drag their parents to church. That's why most churches will have children's programs and build them up. Because they know that when the children start coming to church, the parents are likely to follow. And in this case, I think it's true that Joseph was the influencer to Pharaoh instead of Pharaoh being the influencer to Joseph. Even though Joseph was 30 years old, the influence of his life was so powerful. And it was really no secret except that God was with him. And Joseph allowed that. Joseph allowed God's Spirit to be in him, which is something God wants for all of us. It's the only way you can stay married, I think, and get along with each other is God's Spirit in us. It's the only way we can not kill each other at work. It's the only way we can have a good attitude when stuff in the world goes crazy, is to have God's Spirit within us. It's the only way we can make it. Without that, we're in trouble, Wes.
I find it uncanny through this whole lesson that the non-Christians recognize that God is in Joseph.
Yes.
I mean, someone has to work on them, so is it God influencing them, non-believers,
Right.
to recognize that Joseph is with God?
Right. I think so. Because I think God's prevenient grace is working on every non-Christian through Christians to bring the non-Christians, and for somebody to come to church that doesn't come to church, God is working on them. And God uses us as Christians, I think, constantly. You know, there's no telling how you might have influenced somebody at Cabela's, you know, through your life, who doesn't know the Lord. And sometimes it's through the simplest ways. It may not be through having a lunchtime Bible study. It may be through the fact that you have a smile on your face most all the time. And the things of this world don't shake you because you have a rudder. You have a purpose for which you live. But I think it's an excellent point. And I think that's why Christians, we get this opportunity to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. We need light because we live in a dark world, and the light penetrates the darkness, influences the darkness. We're salt, hopefully making other people thirsty for something to drink called living water. It's a good point, Wes. Someone else before we close? Brian?
Between studying the book of James and the lessons that we got from that and the story of Joseph, I think there's plenty here for us